At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aurum. Let's begin. Any veteran sniper can tell you there's a universal law that holds true from the galactic core to the uncharted rim. The more advanced the bureaucracy, the more stupefyingly dull the job. And since the Concordat's observational sniper cadre possessed the most labyrinthine, form-obsessed, soul-crushingly advanced bureaucracy in the known universe, Sergeant Hesh Klaxon was currently experiencing a level of profound, weaponized boredom that bordered on a Class II existential threat. For 40 days, he had been staring at the universe's most heavily armed staring contest. The gully was hot. The air, according to the shelter's atmospheric analyzer, was a heady cocktail of parched dust, aerosolized fear pheromones, and a scent diplomatically labeled unspecified ungulate emissions. Across the Valley of Elah, two armies of bipedal primates postured at each other from opposing hills, achieving precisely nothing with a terrifying, repetitive certainty. "Just once," Hesh clicked, his voice a low, chitinous rattle. "I'd like to be assigned a mandatory R&R that involves an actual reclining chair, and maybe a beverage with a low-yield fusion reaction on it." Corporal Globo, a being whose natural posture suggested a lifetime of craning to read fine print, didn't look up from the data slate wavering like a heat haze before him.
"The directive is for cultural enrichment, Sergeant, not relaxation. General Grast was most specific. His latest monograph, The Psychological Impact of Champion-Based Conflict Resolution in Pre-Industrial Societies, is causing quite a stir in the Historical Strategy Department." "I'm sure it is," Hesh grumbled, pressing his omnioculars to his primary visual sensors. "His last seminar on the tactical application of sharpened sticks cost me a full rotation of rest and the will to live. I'd rather Grast caused a stir by falling down a gravity well." "An outcome with a statistical probability of 0.003%, I'm afraid," Globo said. "Though the data from this strip will be invaluable. The phoretic content of this planet's soil is extraordinary. It's creating fascinating resonance interference with our power cells." "Fascinating," Hesh deadpanned. "Is that your technical term for draining our life support 15% faster than the manual said it would?" "The effect is more pronounced on smaller, less shielded emitters," Globo clarified. "Such as our personal cloaking fields. I would advise against any untented excursions." He didn't need to look at Private Flarn. Flarn was not looking at the two armies. He was not looking at the advanced alien technology keeping them hidden. He was looking at the Israelite camp through a low-power magnifier, his head tilted. He was supposed to be the wide-eyed rookie, the tourist, but his focus was peculiar. "They share their water skins," Flarn murmured, his voice a series of soft, resonant hums. "Even the ones who are clearly not from the same family unit. The larger ones stand guard, while the smaller ones drink. There's a pattern to it, a social structure based on mutual support in a high-stress environment." Hesh and Globo exchanged a look, a shared moment of suffering at the rookie's naivete that didn't quite connect. Flarn wasn't distracted by a shiny beetle this time. He was analyzing. "Private," Hesh said, lowering his binoculars. "Your official mission role is Auxiliary Observer. Your unofficial mission role is Don't Touch Anything. Please confine your observations to tactically relevant data." Is social cohesion not tactically relevant, Sergeant? Florin asked, his wide, guileless optical sensors turning to Hesh. Before Hesh could formulate a sufficiently scathing reply, a voice echoed across the valley. It was a sound that didn't require an atmospheric analyzer to identify. It was pure, distilled arrogance, amplified by lung capacity and ego. "Why do you come out and set your battle in array?" the voice roared. "Am I not a Philistine, and you servants to Saul? Choose a man for you, and let him come down to me!" A figure strode out from the Philistine lines. Even without magnification, he was immense. A mountain of a man, encased in polished bronze that flared in the harsh sunlight like a secondary, malevolent star. He carried a spear that could have been a mast for a small boat, and a sword that looked heavy enough to anchor it. Ah, Hesh sighed. The daily motivational speech. Globo's fingers tapped on his slate, bringing up a wireframe model of the giant. Subject designation, Goliath. Height, approximately 2.9 standard meters. Mass, estimated at 350 kilograms. Biometrics show significant metabolic stress and hormonal imbalances consistent with chronic pituitary dysfunction. A classic case of acromegaly. A medical curiosity, Globo. A tactical assessment, Hesh dismissed. What about his gear? Armor is simple cast bronze, provides 83% coverage, but leaves significant vulnerabilities at all major articulation points. By their standards, it's formidable. By ours, it's decorative. Hesh raised his binoculars again, the casual observer gone, replaced by the analyst. All posturing, he muttered, but his words were sharper. His stance is too wide, compensating for poor balance, likely a side effect of his size. The helmet is open-faced. Even by their standards, any competent archer on that field could. He trailed off with a sigh of disgust. The Israelites were making no move. Of course, this is all academic. One shot from my rifle, a single stabilized plasma bolt right through that oversized head of his. Over before his slow-moving nervous system could even register the concept of surprise. A delightful thought, Sergeant, Globo said. But alas, non-interference. Yes, Hesh grumbled. The Concordat's most sacred and irritating law. We can watch them blunder their way to extinction, but we can't offer them a single piece of helpful advice. Like, say, don't send your biggest target out alone every morning to announce his presence to every sniper in a 5-kilometer radius. Florin was still watching the Israelites. They are afraid of him, he hummed. It has broken their cohesion. Hesh lowered his binoculars and rubbed his manipulators over his tired eyes. 40 days of this. 40 days of shouting and staring. I'm going to submit a report to Grast. Title: The Psychological Impact of Extreme Boredom on Elite Reconnaissance Teams. Maybe he'll win another prize. Into this valley of fear and tactical stagnation walked a delivery boy. David, son of Jesse, carried an ephah of parched grain and 10 loaves of bread for his 3 older brothers, who were, at that moment, doing a remarkable impression of sun-baked rocks on the Israelite hillside. His world was sheep, sun, and wild hills, a life entirely separate from the ordered, terrified ranks of the army. He heard the giant's daily taunt, felt the wave of fear that washed over the soldiers, and experienced a feeling that was utterly alien to every other man there. Annoyance. A deep, profound, professional offense. This loud,
arrogant thing was disrupting the natural order. It was a wolf in the pasture, a bear near the watering hole. It was a problem that needed solving. He found his eldest brother, Eliab, attempting to become one with a large boulder.
"Brother,"
David said, offering a loaf of bread.
"Father sends his greetings and sustenance."
Eliab snatched the bread, his eyes never leaving the distant figure of Goliath.
"What are you doing here? Have you abandoned those few sheep in the wilderness to come and gawk at the war? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart. You came down just to see the battle." "What have I done now?"
David asked, his tone level. He gestured with his chin towards the valley floor.
"Is there not a cause? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?"
His voice didn't carry far, but it reached the men nearest him. They turned, seeing a boy, a youth with a shepherd's staff, a simple tunic, and a face set with earnest anger. And, tucked into the leather sash at his waist, they saw a folded piece of leather with 2 long braided cords, a common shepherd's sling. In the optically bent air of the alien hideout, Flarn pointed a slender digit.
"Sergeant, the social dynamic is shifting. A new individual has arrived. A juvenile. He is causing a localized spike in agitation."
Hesh, who had been contemplating the merits of entering a state of forced hibernation until their extraction window opened, sighed and lifted his omnioculars. He focused on the small commotion. He saw the boy's stance, spine straight, utterly without fear, arguing with the larger, armored primate. He saw the boy gesture animatedly towards the distant, bronze-clad behemoth. Then, Hesh's gaze swept down, cataloging the individual's equipment: staff, pouch, tunic, sash, and tucked into the sash, Hesh's manipulators froze on the focus wheel. He zoomed in. The image sharpened, resolving into a pathetic-looking piece of folded leather and string. He stared, lowered the binoculars, blinked his mosaic-lensed eyes, and raised them again, as if trying to force reality to correct a data error. A low, rumbling sound began deep in Hesh's thorax. It was a sound his subordinates had never heard before, the rusty, grinding sound of pure, undiluted amusement fighting its way out of a creature who considered smiling a waste of facial muscles. The sound grew, bubbling up into a series of dry, rasping clicks. Globo looked up from his slate, alerted by the anomalous audio signature.
"Sergeant, are you experiencing a respiratory system malfunction?"
Hesh didn't answer. He just pointed, his entire arm trembling slightly with suppressed clicks. Globo, intrigued, swiveled a secondary optical sensor. He followed Hesh's gesture and zoomed his own view screens in on the boy. He saw the sling. Globo's mouth parts parted. A high-pitched, whistling wheeze escaped him, a sound like a pressure valve failing on an antique steam engine.
"By the twin sons of Halcyon,"
he managed, his voice cracking with computational disbelief.
Is that a projectile accelerant powered by woven plant fiber?"
Flarn, seeing his superiors finally engaging with the local culture in a way he understood, let out a series of happy, bubbling chirps of laughter.
"Intends to confront the fully armored behemoth,"
Hesh gasped, clutching his sides as another wave of laughter racked his frame.
"With a handheld centrifugal force generator. The probability of a successful outcome,"
Globo wheezed, wiping a droplet of optical lubricant from his eye,
"is statistically indistinguishable from the probability of this planet spontaneously turning into a raspberry flan."
They laughed, the deep, condescending, galaxy-weary laugh of beings who commanded weapons that could deorbit moons, looking down at a local who thought the sophisticated solution to his problem was a rock and a bit of string. It is a truth universally acknowledged by those who study such things that a weapon is only a toy until you see a master use it to ruin someone's day, and the galaxy's best snipers were about to get a front-row seat for the master class. News, especially bizarre news, is the fastest thing in a terrified army. The story of the shepherd boy who wanted to fight the giant spread like wildfire, a spark of absurdity in a landscape of dread. It flowed up the chain of command until it lapped at the entrance of the king's tent. King Saul sat, a great and weary man entombed in his own reputation. When they brought David before him, he saw a youth who mirrored his army's utter desperation.
"They tell me,"
Saul said, his voice rasping with 40 days of failure,
"that you will go and fight this Philistine."
"Let no man's heart fail because of him,"
David replied. His voice was steady, clear, and devoid of the false bravado of soldiers.
"Your servant will go and fight."
Saul looked at the boy's wiry frame, the smooth cheeks unmarred by scar tissue, the calloused hands of a shepherd, not a swordsman.
"You are not able,"
he said, his tone one of gentle, paternal pity.
"You are but a youth. He has been a man of war since his youth."
"Your servant kept his father's sheep,"
David said.
"When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear."
He looked Saul directly in the eye.
"This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God."
He was reframing the problem, reducing a champion to a pest. Goliath was just a bigger, louder, two-legged predator. The principles of engagement, he implied, were identical. Saul, a man drowning in a sea of cowardice, found himself clinging to this strange, confident splinter of wood. The boy's gaze held a startling certainty.
"Go,"
he said, his voice a hoarse whisper,
"and the Lord be with you."
Then Saul did the only logical thing a commander could do. He offered a hardware upgrade. A heavy bronze helmet was settled on David's head, immediately obscuring his vision. A coat of mail, each ring a testament to a blacksmith's skill, was draped over his small shoulders, its weight making him stagger. Saul's own sword, a king's weapon, was girded at his side. In the alien tent, Hesh nodded with grim approval.
"Finally, some tactical sense. Personal protective equipment. It increases survivability. It's the most basic principle of combat."
But David, encumbered, took 2 clumsy steps and stopped. This wasn't his gear. This wasn't his way of fighting. It was a shell designed for a different kind of animal.
"I cannot go in these,"
he said, his voice muffled and distant from within the helmet, shrugging it all off, the helmet, the mail, the sword.
"For I have not tested them."
He stood once more in his simple tunic. He had shed the unfamiliar protection for his own mobility, choosing his skill over their technology. In the tent, the last vestiges of amusement had long since died, replaced by a tense, analytical silence. Hesh found himself nodding again, a small professional jerk of his head.
"Sensible,"
he murmured.
"Never enter an active engagement with untested equipment. It's rule number 1.
Globo concurred.
A sound tactical decision. Unfamiliarity with the weight and balance of the armor would impede his movement, making him an easier target.
It was Flarn who broke the consensus. His head was tilted, his wide eyes full of a simple, devastating logic.
"But Sergeant," he hummed, "he is not seeking different equipment. He is rejecting all equipment. Is it that the armor is untested, or is he not planning on getting hit?"
The question dropped into the silent tent like a singularity.
Is he not planning on getting hit?
Hesh went rigid. Globo's mouthparts clicked shut. The concept was so simple, so audacious, so completely outside their tactical framework of threat mitigation and survivability percentages. Survival was not about withstanding a blow, but ensuring one never landed. Hesh's cynicism, his boredom, his professional arrogance, it all collapsed. This was no simple fool. This was an operator, a professional with a plan so confident it bordered on insanity. He leaned forward, his mosaic eyes narrowed to furious points of light.
"Globo,"
he snapped, the command a low growl that vibrated through the floor plating.
"Magnify on the boy, full spectrum analysis. Forget the giant. I want to know everything about this primitive. What is his play?"
David walked away from the king's tent, the stares of 1,000 baffled soldiers following him like a physical weight. He ignored them. He walked past the battle lines, down the slope, and toward the brook that gurgled and whispered its way through the valley floor. He knelt by the clear, shallow water. His hands, dark against the pale stones, did not scoop or grab. They sifted. They felt. They weighed. His fingers danced through the cold water, dismissing dozens of stones for every one he selected. He was a master jeweler, selecting the perfect gems for a deadly necklace. He chose 5. One by one, he brought them out of the water. He had selected only smooth, flattened discs, almost perfectly symmetrical, worn into an ideal aerodynamic shape by 1,000 years of tumbling in the current. In the alien hideout, Globo had the visor's magnification cranked to a level that could probably count the atoms on a grain of sand. The geological scanner overlay flared to life, painting the stones in shifting colors.
"Sergeant,"
he breathed, the words a hushed exhalation of dawning comprehension.
"The projectiles. Their composition is high-density ferric basalt, specific gravity of 3.1, significantly more mass per unit of volume than standard granite or limestone."
A chart appeared in Globo's vision, rotating a 3D model of one of the stones.
"And the shape, spheroid optimized, lenticular. He is deliberately choosing stones with a minimal drag coefficient. Its shape is no coincidence."
His hand selected his ammunition, Hesh murmured, the words of his own sniper's creed coming unbidden to his lips.
"For maximum velocity and stability."
Suddenly, the air inside the tent wavered violently. A high-pitched alarm blared for a single, jarring second.
"Cloak field fluctuation,"
Globo yelped.
"The phoretic soil, it's caused a power cascade."
The view on his main slate dissolved into a shower of static. The geological overlay vanished.
"Status,"
Hesh barked.
"Main cloak is holding, but it shunted power from secondary systems to compensate. I've lost my primary sensor feeds. Rebooting to low power, optical-only analysis."
For 3 terrifying seconds, they were blind. Then the screen flickered back to life, the image clear but stripped of its data-rich overlays. Globo keyed his console, manually rerunning the last scan from buffered memory. The results reappeared, stark and simple. High-density basalt, aerodynamically stable. A cold knot of something, a feeling Hesh hadn't experienced since his first real combat drop, tightened in his gut. It was the icy dread that comes from realizing you have profoundly, catastrophically underestimated your opponent. The image of a shepherd boy vanished, replaced by a marksman walking to his firing solution. And he had just spent more time selecting his ammunition than most of Saul's soldiers had spent sharpening their swords. As David stood, pocketing his 5 smooth stones, Globo's calm, analytical demeanor finally and completely shattered. The cool, detached scientist was gone, replaced by a frantic prophet of physics. His manipulators darted across his console, his breath coming in short, sharp hisses as he ran a new simulation based on the updated data.
Sergeant, the sling! He shrieked. I ran a preliminary model based on a simple twine and leather construction. I was wrong. I was catastrophically, fundamentally wrong. That sling is no toy. It's a 2-stage compound lever system, a biomechanical railgun.
A complex diagram of whirling vectors and terrifying energy state transitions filled his view screen.
The initial rotation builds potential energy in a closed system, but the release converts it all into a single fluid motion. It's exponential acceleration. Given a chord length of 1 meter and a rotational velocity of 6 revolutions per second, which is well within the subject's physical capabilities.
Globo's head snapped up from his console, his mouthparts clicking together in a frantic rhythm of pure computational horror. His optical sensors were wide, staring at the image of the small, dark stone in David's hand, then back at his numbers. His voice dropped to a choked, horrified whisper.
The exit velocity. Oh, by the collapsed cores of Karfan, the exit velocity is over 110 meters per second. The kinetic energy transfer upon impact with a projectile of that mass and density.
He looked at Hesh, his eyes screaming a truth that defied all their preconceptions.
Sergeant, what he's holding isn't a stone. It's a non-explosive, hyperkinetic, pocket-sized cannonball.
Hesh was utterly still, his tessellated eyes locked on the small human figure now walking onto the valley floor with the calm purpose of an executioner. The bored tourist was a distant memory. The cynical veteran was gone. In their place was a sniper, watching another sniper walk the final, lonely 100 yards to the perch. David walked onto the great stage of the valley floor, his staff in one hand, his sling unslung and dangling from the other. A tense quiet fell over the valley. From the Philistine side, a tidal wave of sound rolled across the valley. It was a deep, guttural, joyous sound of mockery. Laughter, jeers, insults hurled at the boy with a stick who had come to fight their bronze god. It was the funniest, most pathetic thing they had ever witnessed. From the Israelite side, there was only a profound, horrified, prayer-filled silence. To them, this was a sacrificial lamb, not a champion. The contrast was a study in motion and stillness. On one side, the giant, a monument of static power and brute force, began to lumber forward, his every step a tremor in the earth. On the other, the shepherd, a master of fluid dynamics and quiet purpose. David did not walk a straight line. He began to move in a wide, deliberate arc, like a moon entering orbit around a doomed planet. This simple act of movement immediately put the giant on the defensive. It forced the massive, heavily armored warrior to turn his whole body, to pivot his feet in the dusty soil, to shift the immense weight of his bronze shield, all to keep his small, nimble foe in his line of sight.
Am I a dog?
Goliath bellowed, his voice cracking with the fury of a man whose dignity has been mortally wounded. "That you come to me with staves!" He hefted his enormous spear, its bronze tip catching the sun. "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field!" As Goliath stomped forward, a series of red alerts flashed across Globo's rebooted, low-power display. "Sergeant!" Globo yelped, a new, more urgent terror in his voice. He pointed a trembling digit at the screen.
Pituitary disorder. I dismissed it as a simple medical note, but I didn't factor in the secondary combat implications.
"Translate, Globo, now!" Hesh barked.
The side effects, Sergeant, the severe ones. It causes optic nerve compression. He has tunnel vision. His peripheral optical acuity is severely degraded. He can only clearly see what's directly in front of him.
Globo's voice was a torrent of dawning realization.
And the pressure on his nervous system. Slower motor response, slower reaction times. The boy isn't just circling him. He's running a diagnostic on his weaknesses. He's staying in his peripheral blind spot, forcing the giant to constantly require him as a target. He's exploiting the condition.
David's voice, though not a roar, carried across the valley with an unnerving, piercing clarity. It cut through the giant's bluster like a surgeon's blade.
"You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield,"
he called out, his circling pace never faltering.
"but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied."
Hesh ignored the local theological declarations. He was witnessing a masterclass in single combat.
He's using his mobility to control the engagement,
he muttered, more to himself than to his crew.
He's staying just outside the effective range of the spear. He's fatiguing the target, forcing him to expend energy just to track him. It's perfect.
David raised his voice again, his words no longer a challenge, but a verdict.
"This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel."
He was no longer just a shepherd. He was a prosecutor, reading the charges and declaring the sentence before the jury had even been seated. And he never stopped moving. The observation post crackled with a focused energy that hadn't existed an hour before. Hesh was in his element, his voice clipped and precise, calling out observations as if he were guiding a remote drone strike.
Wind is negligible, a slight cross breeze from the west, 2 knots, not a factor for a kinetic projectile at this range. Operator is maintaining optimal distance. He's controlling the tempo. He is the dominant force in this engagement.
"Globo, final projection on the target's armor integrity," Hesh snapped. Globo's fingers moved.
The helmet's bronze is 4 millimeters thick, forged to deflect a glancing blow from a sword, but useless against a high-velocity piercing projectile. The design leaves the glabella a critical structural weak point in the underlying cranium, completely exposed.
He paused, his analytical brain fighting with the reality he was witnessing.
A 1 in 1,000 shot, Sergeant. The target area is less than 10 square centimeters. Recalculate, Corporal.
Hesh shot back, his eyes never leaving the drama unfolding below. His voice was cold iron.
Recalculate, based on the operator's demonstrated proficiency in tactical analysis, weapon and ammunition selection. Assume he is not going to miss.
A moment of charged silence. Globo typed.
Probability of a successful strike on the designated weak point, assuming master-level proficiency,
he reported, his voice flattened to a factual whisper,
is 98.9%.
Flarn, forgotten in the corner, was holding his breath, his huge eyes wide. He was no longer watching a local brawl. He was watching a master at his art. David stopped circling. He had found his spot. The range was perfect. The angle was perfect. The sun was at his back, a golden glare straight into the giant's already compromised eyes. He reached into his shepherd's bag and took out one of his 5 smooth stones, the chosen one. He settled the small, dense disc of basalt into the leather pouch of his sling, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. He gripped the release cord and the retention cord firmly in his right hand. He began to whirl it. It started slowly, a lazy, looping circle parallel to the ground. It was the movement of a man with all the time in the world. He was building momentum, finding the perfect rhythm, letting the weapon speak to him. Then the speed increased. The lazy arc tightened into a flat, vicious, horizontal disc of motion. The air began to hum, a low thrumming sound that vibrated up from the soles of the feet. Faster. The hum rose in pitch to a distinct whistle. The leather of the sling blurred, becoming a translucent circle of stored violence beside David's head. He was the calm, still eye of a hurricane he had created. Faster still. The whistle became a sharp, terrifying shriek, a sound that sliced the air, a razor's edge of pure physics that seemed to promise a terrible ending. Goliath, blinded by the sun and his own incandescent rage, took another clumsy, lumbering step forward, raising his spear to finally end the boy's infuriating dance. It was the last step he would ever take. David's wrist flicked, a single, precise, economical motion. He released one cord. The sling, suddenly freed from its circular prison, cracked with the sound of a thunderclap right next to the ear. It was sharp, brutal, and final. The stone was gone. To the naked, unaugmented eyes of the two armies, it was nothing, an invisible blur, a trick of the light. But to the high-speed, multispectral optic sensors of the Concordat's finest, running in their low-power emergency mode, it was a work of terrible, breathtaking art. Their visors automatically tracked the projectile, framing it in a simple green box. They saw it in ultra-slow motion. The disc-shaped stone did not tumble or wobble. It flew as if on a rail, spinning perfectly on its vertical axis like a miniature flying saucer, a gyro-stabilized bullet of ferric basalt. Its optimized shape cut through the air, preserving every last joule of its ferocious kinetic energy for its final, singular purpose. Globos console, for all its limitations, flashed the projection in stark block letters. Projectile velocity, 114 meters per second. Trajectory, perfect. Probability of lethal cranial penetration, 99.999%. The stone struck Goliath square in the forehead. There was no ringing clang of rock on bronze. David's aim was too perfect for that. The stone hit the one place the helmet was not. The sound was quiet, intimate, and personal, and for that reason, utterly horrifying. It was a wet, solid thump crack of dense rock meeting and completely vanquishing thick bone. The rudimentary biometric line for Goliath on Globos display, which had been a jagged mountain range of angry red, instantly flatlined. It became a perfectly straight, perfectly horizontal line. All vital signs ceased in the same microsecond. The giant froze. For one single, logic-defying, silent heartbeat, he stood there, a towering statue of bronze and flesh. The look of rage on his face was wiped clean, replaced by a look of absolute, blank surprise. His brain had been turned off like a faulty switch. His body just hadn't received the memo. Then, gravity, a force that cares nothing for reputation or armor, claimed its due. He did not stagger. He did not crumble. He fell, He fell straight forward like a giant tree and hit the dry earth of the valley floor face first with a ground-shaking, armor-clattering crash that sent a puff of dust into the silent air. A silence descended upon the valley, a silence so deep, so absolute, it felt as if the world had stopped breathing. 40,000 men from two opposing armies stared at the fallen colossus, their minds refusing to process what their eyes had just witnessed. The silence was broken by the sound of pounding feet on dry earth. David did not celebrate. He did not posture. His task was not finished. He ran forward, his feet sure and swift, closing the distance to the giant's corpse. He had no sword of his own, but there was a perfectly good one, albeit a ludicrously large one, right there for the taking. He grabbed the pommel of Goliath's massive blade with both of his small hands. He planted a foot on the dead man's armored back for leverage. With a great, grunting heave, he wrenched the huge sword from its scabbard. The weapon was absurdly heavy, a sharpened slab of bronze almost too much for him to lift, but he managed. Hoisting the blade with two hands, he brought it down in a messy, hacking blow on the giant's neck. Then, with the gory trophy held aloft, its dead eyes staring at nothing, he turned to face the Philistine army. The spell was shattered. From the Israelite lines, a single unified roar of pure, unadulterated triumph erupted. It was the sound of 40 days of cowering fear and grinding humiliation being converted in an instant into a tidal wave of savage, ecstatic joy. They surged down the hill, a disorganized, screaming, unstoppable mob charging towards their routed and demoralized enemies. The Philistines, their champion slain, their courage decapitated along with him, their entire worldview upended in the space of a single heartbeat, broke. They turned and fled, casting away shields and spears in a desperate, panicked scramble for their lives. The battle was over. The rout had begun. The alien tent was silent. The only sounds were the faint, worried hum of the overburdened power cells and the distant, fading screams of the victors and the vanquished. Flarn's lower jaw was slack, his optical sensors fixed on the unfolding carnage. He looked as though he'd just witnessed the spontaneous creation of a new color. Globo was staring at his slate, his manipulator claw hovering over the save icon as if it were a holy relic. He was archiving every microsecond of the encounter data, from the selection of the stones to the final, fatal impact. It was the most valuable, most terrifying, most paradigm-shattering data set he had ever collected. Sergeant Hesh Claxon stood motionless, his omnioculars dangling from one hand, his professional cynicism and galactic arrogance utterly scoured away. He had seen warlords topple empires with orbital bombardments and fleets of starships burn in the hearts of dying suns. He had never seen anything like this. Never. He finally spoke. All condescension was gone, his voice low and sober. "Globo?" "Sergeant?" Globo whispered, not looking away from his screen. "New species entry. Designation human. Subdesignation Homo sapiens." He paused, taking a slow, deliberate breath, as if the words themselves had weight. "Update the threat assessment." Hesh stared out at the small figure of the shepherd boy, who was now being lifted onto the shoulders of cheering, weeping soldiers, a boy disappearing into the legend he had just forged. He dictated his finding. Threat Assessment Update. Species 812. Homo sapiens. Operator skill with low-technology weaponry can achieve tactical results on par with advanced energy weapons in specific contexts. An operator's ability to perfectly analyze and exploit enemy weaknesses defines the lethality, not the weapon itself. His voice hardened. each word an engraving.
Threat assessment must prioritize operator analysis over observed technological disparity. Assumption of superiority is a fatal tactical error. Recommend extreme caution when engaging this species. Extreme.
The tent was silent again for a long moment. He straightened up, his posture once again that of a commander.
Pack it up. Our power cells are low, our education is complete, and I have a report to file that General Grast is never, ever going to believe. We're done here.
There were no complaints. They worked with a new focus, their movements quiet and deliberate, breaking down their equipment. The data slate was secured in a shock-proof case. The omnioculars were stowed. The atmospheric analyzer was powered down. Hesh threw the final switch on the shelter's cloaking generator. The wavering, lumpy distortion in the gully folded in on itself like a mirage collapsing and vanished into nothingness. It left behind only a patch of slightly flattened grass and a few very confused beetles, who now had an unobstructed view of the valley. A moment later, a small, sleek shuttle, its hull plating shifting colors to perfectly match the blue and brown of the world below, rose silently from the gully. It climbed, invisible and unheard, into the upper atmosphere, leaving the Bronze Age to its own brutal, heroic devices. From their viewport, they took one last look at the Valley of Elah. They could see the Israelite army returning to its camp, a river of jubilant men. At their head, David was being carried, a small figure held aloft by a sea of giants. The three snipers had come to an uninteresting dust ball on a mandatory holiday. They had come to laugh. They left with a lesson that would be entered into the Concordat's most highly classified tactical archives, a chilling new addendum to the grand, bloody textbook of galactic warfare. It was a simple lesson, but one that would echo through the sniper cadre for millennia. Never judge the weapon. Judge the hand that wields it.